Let's bring this discussion now. Advocacy group Equal Education has raised the alarm over the state of education in the Western Cape. Classrooms are overcrowded while the number of teachers that schools can hire continues to drop. The province's education department has attributed the slow pace in addressing these issues to budget cuts by the national government. Khumalo is a researcher at Equal Education and she joins us now live to unpack some of these issues. Kim, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. I've got circulars here from 4 schools citing, in fact 5 schools I think, citing a range of posts being cut. Proteas Technical High School, which from the letterhead says it's in Atlantis, telling parents that they're losing 6 of their educators. There's another school, Hoër School Robbenvale, losing 4 posts. Avondale Premier, also in Atlantis, using 2 educators. Westfleer Primary School, 3 educators, and the list goes on and on. And this is in a context where our classrooms are already overcrowded.
Yeah, so good afternoon and thank you so much for having me. So we can go into the particular dynamics of how austerity budgeting is affecting the Western Cape in particular. But first, I think it's important to state that this is a crisis being faced by the education sector as a whole across the country and not just in the Western Cape. It's fundamentally a crisis caused by austerity budgeting and an inequitable funding policy for education services. If we look at this year's budget in particular, we know that if you take inflation into account, the national budget for basic education decreased by 3% in real terms. For the Western Cape in particular, the Western Cape Education Department has stated that they have an overall deficit of 870 million rand, and they've had to take into consideration to employ some real cost-cutting measures, and this involves retrenching some teachers. But we are quite concerned about what the impact of this means. As you said, overcrowding is already an issue in the Western Cape, for example. So we are very, very concerned about what this austerity budgeting means for not just this year, but how sustainable the measures that have been taken from the department's point of view are for the future learners and teachers of the Western Cape.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, do you know, Kim, the schools that I've mentioned, and I'm sure you know of other schools that I haven't mentioned at the start of our discussion as well, but you know particulars about these schools and, you know, whether this essentially takes the school several steps back. I'm thinking of something like the department's Back on Track plans. It was aimed at expanding the number of resources for learners, particularly in grade 8 and grade 10, because, you know, obviously we're still also trying to catch up in many ways to the losses of COVID-19.
So we know, like, from some of the letters that you mentioned of the schools, they are speaking about maybe learners coming in 2 or 3 times a week, and we already have seen the devastating learning losses that we experienced during COVID-19 as a result of rotational learning. Some of the letters also state that some classes will have to be larger as a result of the retrenchment of teachers, so 50 to 60 learners in a classroom. And our 2021 report clearly speaks about the complex nature of overcrowding in schools and how education departments need to take into account several factors when dealing with overcrowding. And we know that the WCED does have some strategies like the one you mentioned, but also strategies like the Rapid Schools Build program that addresses the key aspects of building new schools as a result of learner migration into the Western Cape and keeping up with learner placements as well as overcrowding. But it's very unclear how this program will then be effective if there are no teachers to teach in those new schools, and there's already a shortage of teachers in the schools that we're seeing. We also released a report in 2023 that highlighted the impact of overcrowding, so not just shining a light on the fact that there is an overcrowding crisis, but what this means for teaching and learning. And it highlighted that teachers' motivation and attitudes are negatively or harmed by overcrowding. So teachers don't feel motivated to go to work to teach in such environments. And we know that learners also become very lethargic and are affected badly by overcrowding in schools.
No, absolutely.
So it's quite concerning that as a result of budget cutting across the country, we're seeing that education departments really have to contend with robbing Peter to pay Paul to deal with these cuts.
Yeah, because arguably there are surely other sectors we can cut from, without touching education and healthcare, for example. I mean, one of the other things that this is going to impact, and you've mentioned it already, is that staff may have to take on extra work. Now, if any of our viewers know or are teachers who are working in the field, we already know our teachers have an incredible amount on their plate. And I'm sure if they're watching this interview, the thought that crosses your mind is how? How would I take on this extra work?
So, like, the circular that the Western Cape Education Department shared also speaks about cutting key support staff, such as substitute teachers, for example. And already teachers are going through so much, having to do their own work, having to mark, having to teach multiple subjects. So it's quite concerning that this is also happening. But we want to really stress the fact that in the realm of austerity, internal reprioritization, or, like I said, robbing Peter to pay Paul becomes the norm. And we reject this strategy entirely. We cannot continue to pit different segments of the working class or working class communities against each other in order to deal with the scarcity that's created by austerity. We know that learners are suffering. The basic education sector entirely is also suffering. And the bottom line is that we need more funding in the public education sector. We need more teachers, we need more classrooms, better infrastructure, psychosocial support, all of it. And we can't do that if National Treasury keeps cutting the budget of the education sector. Yeah,
I mean, you're saying we need more teachers, we need more support in a context where these cuts are taking place and these posts are being left vacant. What are we saying to young people who would like to enter the field? I suppose it's a no.
Yeah, I think it's quite scary because a lot of young people are going into universities and getting bursaries such as the Funza Leshaka bursary. That's quite, that focuses mainly on them becoming qualified teachers. And we are saying that there's a need for more qualified teachers, for example, in STEM. So it's quite a difficult situation where you're putting young people into these higher learning institutions and setting them up for failure as soon as they graduate. So it's quite concerning, and it affects, it ripples across different sectors, like we said, and turns into a reprioritization thing within those sectors. So we really don't want this to continue, pitting different working class communities against each other. We really don't want it to continue, and we see that this means that young qualified teachers are unable to come into the market with everything that they've learned from university. So the teacher shortage will really continue on if we don't come up with a sustainable way of dealing with these shortages.
Absolutely. And of course, the impact on learners cannot be overstated. Let me thank you for your time. Kim Khumalo is a researcher with Equal Education as we continue to unpack the budget cuts, and she says not only in the Western Cape, but in the education department nationally as well.